as artistically. It's just, if Rita would let me buy it, but she'd kill me if I did.
Okay, so now we're December 29th, right? 2012. And we're Morty Lazar, Jordan Rosenberg, and Buzz Rosenberg. And we're going to hear a family version of our family. So,
well, a family version of your family. You're going to hear a version of, who was lost in the Holocaust and when. All right? So we'll start with the Schlachter Hein side. You know Schlachter. You know that.
Maybe if you can trace it back. So, Jordan and I are the son of Yossi Rosenberg. Yossi Rosenberg was a cousin of your mother.
Was a cousin of my mother.
Alfie.
Yes. And your grandfather.
Lou Rosenberg or
no,
Hein?
The Hein side, your grandmother.
Right.
Was a sister to my grandfather.
So Mary Hein was a
sister
to
the now you're asking me. All of a sudden his name is Yehoshua Binyamin. Joe Benjamin. Yehoshua Binyamin. That's what they.
Okay.
So, and he died in 1916.
And he was a rabbi, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't a rabbi.
Okay.
He said he was a rabbi.
Mary's father wasn't a rabbi?
Maybe Mary's brother wasn't a rabbi.
Oh, it's Mary's brother.
Mary's brother.
Okay, so Mary's brother died in 1916. Okay.
And he's the only one of that side of the family that stayed in Europe.
Now, was he the one who came to the United States and
went back? He came to the United States and he went back. He came to the United States. He was the eldest. He'd already been married. He had children. Came to the United States and he went back.
Now, is he the one with the banana story that went to eat the banana and everybody laughed at him because he didn't know how to eat a banana?
I don't know. I never heard that story.
Okay.
All right, but it's on both sides. It gets a little complicated because his wife, who would have been a sister-in-law to your grandmother, right, was my other grandmother's sister. Okay?
So what was your other grandmother's name?
Her name was Esther.
Okay.
And her husband, my other grandfather, Yisrael, also came to the United States, right, as did all of his brothers and his one sister.
Are they Hines?
No, they're Lazarovich's, Lazars.
Okay.
This is Pop-Up's grandfather?
No.
This is
like in-laws.
It was Mary's
brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law. Right. So
he came, but he also went back because he also had a wife and kids. And I had a cousin, and I've lost touch with him, a distant cousin who was doing family tree stuff. Oh, good. I see you know how to light that. Family tree stuff. And he said the story he had heard from the Lazar side. He went back to Europe because America wasn't religious enough for him. And I said, well, I have the story I heard from my aunts, who were his nieces, was he went back because he had to work too hard, which is more appropriate, because he had a big bakery and they were fairly well off.
Now, is he living in Washington or New York?
No, New York.
Would that have been like, if it was Lower East Side?
I have no idea. Maybe he also lived in Chicago. His mother, there's one for you. His mother, my great-grandmother,
right,
is buried in Chicago.
Wow. And what was her name?
Rachel Lazarovich.
Rachel Lazar.
And her
was that through your father?
My father's grandmother, and I never knew it until this cousin said, they found her grave, and he sent me pictures of her, and he found her entry form at Ellis Island, and it's very strange. And then we'll get on to the side that you're interested in, show you how odd these stories are. It says on her entry form she was born in Warsaw, Russia, which is true, right? And that her last place of residence was Jerusalem, Palestine. And that she came via England to New York to be with her sons in Chicago.
What year would that have been?
That would have been 1912. She sailed on a sister ship to the Titanic. So he said she couldn't have lived in Jerusalem. And I said she could have because her husband died in 1907. My great-grandfather, Nachman David, died in 1907. And a lot of the older, and she was only in her 50s, a lot of the older Jewish people, you know, if they could, wanted to spend their last years in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem. And they came. Meyer Lansky's had grandparents.
had all three of you.
Yeah. Well, did you go over there? Anyway.
Yeah, we went to over there. I got some
Joy wants to go down
We're
here.
recording the story.
Okay.
sorry.
All right, let's go. So,
Go ahead, Albie.
so she's there. You go with them.
I don't want to, but
And
I'm
go
going to
sit
have some
over-
of your coffee.
So you know, she's buried in Chicago.
I'm gonna need a coffee when I get back.
All right.
Oh, here, Jordan.
And my grandfather is the only one of her children that was murdered in Treblinka.
Now play this back to me again now, this last part.
She's buried in Chicago.
She's buried in Chicago.
She died in 1916 or 1916. She was 65 years old. And my cousin Ralph, who since died, he remembers her. He remembers her, you know. Anyway, okay. So let's go to the Hein side. Who got killed in the Holocaust is what I think you would
Right.
like to know. All right, my grandmother, who would have been your grandmother's sister-in-law,
Okay.
right? Yeah,
So just so we get this straight,
Sarah.
Morty mother is Alti.
Yeah,
Alti has sisters Leche and Runchi
and
And-
Sephora.
and Sephora. Okay.
Yes,
Okay. And then who is the person who died in Treblinka?
there's more than one person.
Okay.
There is my grandmother,
So that would be
Sarah.
now,
Sarah's-
Sarah is whose mother?
What? That would have been my mother's mother.
So it would be Alti's mother.
Yes, and Sarah, and Alfie and Runchi and Leche and Mo and Chaim Velvel's mother.
Okay.
Those are the five that survived.
Right.
All right.
And what was her last name?
My grandmother's last name in Poland was Schlachter, or in
Okay.
Russia. You know that story.
No, you'll tell me in a minute. But let's get this straight. So her name before she was married or after she was married?
After she was married was Schlachter.
Okay, Sarah Schlachter.
Sarah Schlachter, because there was prior to that, the generation prior, there was somebody got married, and he was a Hein, but he married. There were only two.
This is the military story, right?
So you know the story.
A little bit. Well, I'm just trying to get
No,
the whole story
the
out.
military story is that the Jews had to go to the Russian army, right? But they were excused from the Russian army if they were married into a family where there were no sons, and they took the wife's maiden name. So that's why they became Schlachter in Europe, so they didn't have to go to in Russia. So they didn't
So
have.
was he a Hein?
He was a Hein, originally changed to Schlachter. This would be the great grandfather. And as soon as they came to America, they changed it back to Hein. Except my mother was Schlachter in Canada. She stayed Schlachter. Okay, that last names were immaterial. And so they spelt it H-E-I-N, except for the Ames. You know, there's a side of the family called Ames in
No.
Washington.
No.
A-E-I-N.
A-E-I-N? They're
Yeah.
also relatives?
They're also relatives, and most likely that was the way the name was in Hebrew or Yiddish. The Hein would be spelt with a Hey as the first letter, but it should have been spelt with an Ayin, which is the Ain. So the Ains were more appropriately correct. But that's not important, because you have to go into the whole story of where last names came from anyway. All right. So it would have been, let me see, your great aunt, my grandmother.
Right.
She was murdered in Treblinka,
On what day?
December 12th, 1942.
I
Now,
thought you said December 14th.
December 14th, you're right, I'm sorry, thank you. December 14th, 1942. December 14th is Nicole's birthday.
And is that Sarah Schlachter?
Sarah Schlachter.
Okay.
Or Sarah Hein, if you want to put it in the way they call themselves.
Now, was her husband killed then? Or
No, her husband, my grandfather's the one who died in 1916.
Okay.
All
So
right?
he died considerably earlier than she did.
Yeah, he died during World War One.
Right.
She died. She was murdered in Treblinka, December 14th, 1942. You know, Treblinka was open for less than a year, but they did a job, man. 800,000 Jews were killed in less than a year. All right. Yeah, wait, I'll tell you why we know the date, or we assume it's the date. Also, her son who stayed in Europe, Aaron Shmuel, who was the oldest of the children.
So the oldest of the children of Lechi, Rachi, Alti?
The oldest brother.
The oldest brother.
The oldest one.
And
My
his
mother,
name is again what?
Aaron Shmuel.
Aaron, like Aaron?
Aaron Shmuel.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And his wife, and I don't remember her name, I've got it written down someplace, and his 4 children, and Tzipora, the youngest sister,
Right.
and her husband, and her kid. Right? And why do we know December 14th, 19...
So they were all killed the same day?
We're assuming that. We
Right.
know, because the Germans didn't piss around, we know that because one of the survivors of Treblinka, you know, there was a revolt in Treblinka. You didn't know that.
No.
There was a revolt. And people escaped. I think 300 or 400 escaped, and 60 survived. And one of the survivors, what was it? Grabinski. Sonia Grabinski.
Grabinski, okay.
Who was from Dombrovi. She saw my grandmother Sarah, right, your grandmother's sister-in-law,
Right.
and her youngest daughter Tzipora in the line waiting to go into the gas chamber on that day. She saw it. All right, so we assume that everybody else was murdered that day as well. So that everybody else would include Aaron Shmuel, his wife and his children, and Tzippora's husband and son. So that they were all killed, and also would include my other grandparents and my father's brothers and sisters and their children. So that's, you know.
How did your father's Ezra, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did your father not end up there?
My father didn't end up there because at the age of 19,
Wait until you lean back a little bit.
at the age of 19 in 1920, I'll tell you in a minute, it's 1928, he went to Brazil.
So he left really early.
He left really early. He wanted to come here.
Right.
He and his cousin from Bialystok applied to come here. The British had to give them a permit, and for whatever.
Coming here meant coming to Israel.
To Israel, right. The British, in their perversity, gave his cousin Leitke a permit to come. Wouldn't give my father a permit to come, and they wanted to get out of Europe. So the country they could go to that didn't have any real requirements, and there were people from Dombrovi there, I guess, was Brazil. So he went to Brazil.
What city did he go to?
Sao Paulo.
Sao Paulo. So why would a Jew be so anxious to get out of Poland, Russia in 1928?
It was Poland then.
Was Poland then?
Yeah.
But why would he be so anxious to leave Poland?
Because, everybody wanted to get out if they could. It wasn't a good place for Jews, despite what my aunt always said.
So were there still kind of pogrom type activities?
There were the Poles were anti-Semitic.
Right.
Probably still are.
Right.
So he went to Brazil, and that's how he survived. But one of my uncles, one of his brothers, went to Mexico and was there for 5 or 6 years. I'm not sure. It's never very clear how many. And had a bakery because that was a family business and was very successful as a baker. And went back to Poland in 1938. He left a wife there and children, which is a common immigrant kind of thing, and built a nice house in Dombrovi and lived in it for less than a year they were in the Russian part of Poland that had been when the Germans invaded, so they were safe for a year and a half. So he lived in it for a little while, and then that was it.
So did he get killed also?
Yeah, all my father's brothers and sisters, except for one who was named after my great-grandfather, Nachman David, right? And he died from tuberculosis. And I know that how do I know my grandfather on my father's side was well-to-do. I know that because I've got I've got a description of what the house was like.
That's the baker.
The baker, because when his son got sick with tuberculosis, he was able to afford to take him to various spas and places like that in Austria and in Czechoslovakia for treatment for tuberculosis, and that's what they did. It didn't help. He died.
Can you tell me, fill in a little bit? So again, I'm trying to work this back from the Hines that I'm connected to. So we have Mary Hein, my grandmother, and then she's first cousins with.
Now, Mary Hein was a sister to my grandfather.
And his name again is.
Yehoshua ben Yamin.
Okay.
And his brother is the one who you're saying.
Now is that Uncle Heine, or is that?
No.
That's a different Joe Hein. Or?
Different. Joe Hein. There's a lot of Joe Hines in the family.
Right. So, but that was her brother.
That was your Mary's brother.
Okay, and he was.
1916.
He died in 1916.
Yeah.
Okay.
So her sister-in-law was killed in Treblinka.
Right.
And her nieces and nephews, a couple of her a niece and a nephew, and their spouses were murdered in Treblinka, and their children were murdered in
So
Treblinka.
did Mary's family, going straight up, like Mary was one of, I guess, 12 or 13 kids.
There were a lot of them.
Right. Did any of those members get killed in
As
the
far as
Holocaust?
no, I think all of them got out. All of them were in America by then.
Because one of them, I've heard the story that came over to the United States. I think Teeny told me the story, where one of the relatives came over before the war, before the Nazis took over, couldn't really adapt, and he was eating a banana. It's a story I heard.
I don't know.
And he ate it like a carrot.
I have no idea.
And everybody laughed at him.
No, that wouldn't have been. My grandfather was back in Europe before the First World War broke out.
Right.
So
Okay.
it may have been. But the other thing is that my grandmother, Sarah,
Right.
was in the United States in the early 30s. And she was there for just, no.
Right here. No, just right here. So that's Sarah Schlachter.
Sarah Schlachter, yeah.
She was in the United States in the 1930s.
The early 30s. I have pictures of her
Right.
in Washington. She was with Seymour Hein and forgotten who else. And they were little kids, and there she was. And I think somehow I vaguely remember a story that she had become an American citizen because the citizenship law at that time in the States, naturalization law was very peculiar, as it still is. That if you had children that were citizens, you could become a citizen
Right.
without waiting 5 years. And so she had two sons that were citizens. They were the two sons that were in the States.
And what would their names be?
That would be Mo and Hein Velvel. Right?
Okay.
Okay. And then she went back to Poland because she left two daughters and a son, and she went back. She stayed long enough to get Leitchi married off. Leitchi was married off in 1932, and long enough to prevent my mother from going to Brazil to marry my father, and said, "You bring him to Canada." And in fact, she did. She must have been an American citizen because she was able to bring Leitchi into the United States from Canada, because Leitchi lived in Canada for a year, and was able to bring her into the United States.
The part that I'm again, maybe because I'm not seeing it on paper, I'm a little bit confused about, is can you tell me the story about how Runchi and one of her sisters, would that have been your mother that left Poland the day before the war broke out?
It was just Runchi.
Just Runchi left.
Yeah.
Okay. And now is that Sarah, who lives in Israel's mother?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Now,
so if
the
you can
other
tell me
sto-
this, can you tell
The
that story?
story I heard was that they had made the visa for Tzipora, the youngest sister, to come,
Right,
but she'd gotten married and had a kid and a husband, so
in Poland.
in Poland, and so Runchi took the visa, got the visa. And
Did
took
she take the visa with the name Sapor on it?
No, they did it all legally. I assume because
So when she came over here, Runchi, she came by herself?
came by herself.
Nobody else? So,
No,
so
and she met her husband Sam on the boat.
on the boat.
And you know the story, the boat was scraped, and it took them 10 days to go from Danzig to New York
Was straight by the German.
by the Germans.
So when she got to the United
She
States,
got to-
who was she coming to meet?
She had one sister, two brothers in Washington.
And who were they?
That was Leitchi was in Washington then,
Right?
and Chaim Velvel and Mo were in Washington, and a bunch of aunts. They'd all originally went to New York.
But the part that I'm again trying to struggle with is Mary was the youngest child of the 12 or something. She came to the United States in 1903.
All right.
So
She didn't
if
come, but her parents were here too.
in the United States,
You know that
or was
Mary,
a rabbi in New York or
Mary,
something?
I don't know. I don't know if he was a rabbi.
Well, that's what my father's told
Okay,
me.
well, your father. Okay, I'm not going to argue with your father.
Right.
It could be, but you know that there are would be your great grandparents, mine as well too, are buried in New York. Have you ever?
Right.
You've seen the pictures
I have photographs of
of
them.
the.
She looks, the woman looks very much like my father, and the man has a big beard. We have a photograph.
Oh,
of
that's
it.
the one that
Carolyn Pincus had.
No, Sarah has it in her house too.
Okay,
Make me Xerox.
I can email a picture.
No,
of
no,
it.
don't email. Just Xerox some copies and send them to me, and I'll have them turned into real photographs. I asked Sarah to do it, but asking
But
Sarah,
if you have a digital, you can print it anywhere.
I got
You'd
to
rather do it the other way.
just photocopy it, and I'll take it and send it to me.
And their names again. That was Joseph, right?
Yeah, Hein.
Joseph Hein, and the woman's name was.
Don't I have to look at the grave? I don't, or I have to look at what I have. All right.
Because Joseph Hein, who Popop's named after, Yossi's named after, it was his grandfather. Okay, and the woman. I have the two photographs in our house that are really old that I duplicated from Carolyn Pincus. Are those individuals? I also have a photograph of a wedding that had like Hein Velvel and that whole crew of guys, and then Mary and a crew of her sisters, all in a photograph.
A wedding?
That I can share with you
Is it
also.
a wedding?
Looked like a wedding or party. They were in tuxedos.
Oh, okay. It would be a wedding. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that's the Hein side. As soon as they came to North America or to America, they changed the name back to Hein, which it was. So it was a Schlachter for one or two generations, and back to Hein. And the thing maybe I think I don't understand
Right.
is they were all in New York. All right. How the hell did they end up in Washington?
Oh, I do have that story through Sarah. I maybe don't remember it exactly, but somehow some of the sisters, I think maybe Tante Tybee, this part I'm not positive about, had moved down to Washington.
Why?
I don't know the reason why. I
Because
just
in Washington, in New York, they were cigar makers.
Right. They were cigar makers?
They were cigar makers.
The Hein family were?
The women.
Women were?
Yeah, that's the story. They rolled
Okay.
cigars.
Because the story that I hear, the pickup of the story, is that Mary Hein was working in a grocery store, in her parents' grocery store in Washington. And,
How did her parents get to Washington?
And wait a second. So Mary was working in a store in Washington, and Lou Rosenberg walked in and was supposedly fell in love with her at first sight. But Lou was born in the United States.
Yes.
He was not an immigrant. He was
No.
born in the United States in 1889 on M Street in Georgetown. So I know that part of the
Yeah,
story
alright.
pretty well. I don't
Well,
know I did hear the story, and I have it on tape someplace, of how they got from New York, which I'll try and relate
yeah,
to.
all right, because it's
They probably had a job or
no,
something.
no, because her parents, Mary's parents,
Right,
I think, are the ones that are buried in New York.
right, they
So
are.
why would they, if they were in Washington in a grocery store?
I think she went down. Mary went down to Washington.
Knock the ash off. And then-
Mary went down to Washington, but I don't recall the reason why.
Yeah, that's always puzzled me. You know, because if you know anything about the Washington Jewish community, it's a very transient Jewish community.
The whole Washington community is very
No, but the Jewish community is very transient. There's a large community, but there are people who, they're Washingtonians. Like Rita was born in Washington, and Nicole was born in Washington, and that's you know.
Right.
But you know, on the Hein side of the family, we can go back 6 generations in Washington, which makes it one of the older.
Right. And
Continuous-
also with my father's side, which you probably don't know, but you may have a clue about some of this. I'll tell you what I know, and you can see if you can fill it in. My father is Yossi or Joseph. His mother is Mary and Louis. It ends up that Louis's father was married, and his wife was cheating on him, and he caught them, and the wife was embarrassed him so much that the husband, who took the name eventually John Rosenberg, he was called John Rosenberg, left Washington and never returned.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now it ends up that that's why Louis became kind of without a father, and he ended up living with Morris Capers.
Which is not a bad place to end up living, even though
Except that
Morris didn't have any money at that time.
Well,
like that.
Morris didn't have the money, but Morris's father didn't know that Morris was hiding him in the house,
Oh, I
and
never heard.
eventually came out. And then, as they went on,
How
Morris,
to hide somebody in the house.
he was living in the basement. He was bringing food down and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But the idea was that his mother took off, and somehow an aunt became responsible for Louis, who was going to take him to St. Louis. And when they were taking the train towards St. Louis, they said, "Get off the train, Lou. We're not watching over you anymore,"
Oy.
and abandoned a 12-year-old boy.
I never knew that story.
Right. So my father, through the census, has tracked down as best he can John, and we think that when he left, his name was also Israel.
Okay.
That his name is Israel Rosenberg, but he took the name John, went to Los Angeles, and in Los Angeles, he remarried, but he remarried a woman that had the same, I think I've messed up the story. I did mess up the story.
You have to write it
Wait a
down.
second. No, I understand now what I messed up the story. Louis's biological mother was Rose. She was married to Israel. Rose died. And when Rose died, Sarah, the sister of Rose, became his stepmother. And that's the woman who basically cheated on Israel. And when Israel took off, she was going to go back to Kansas City. And when she was going back, she cut Louis loose, and he was on his own. And that's when he hoboed it back to Washington and stayed with Morris Caferts for a while, and then eventually became part of the household. And then
worked at the Ambassador Hotel.
Worked at the Ambassador Hotel, and Morris became very wealthy years later. But that's the story. But what's interesting about Israel Rosenberg, who became John Rosenberg, is that Israel, when he went to California, we're pretty sure married again, and the woman he married was named Rose. So he had 2 wives, both named Rose Rosenberg. And Rose Cohen, who
Yeah,
was Rose
right.
Rosenberg, got the name Rose
Oh.
from the original mother
Oh, I
of
didn't
Lewis.
know. I didn't
That's
know.
that's
I didn't
where
know
Rose came
that.
from.
I didn't know that. I
So-
always wondered where is it from Rose.
So that's a piece of the story that I
All
sort
right.
of know.
Okay.
But we never could really find for sure. My father's looked quite a bit about Israel Rosenberg, who became John Rosenberg. The reason why they know, my father's pretty certain that Israel became John was because he found in the census in the 20s or 30s the information about a John Rosenberg who had certain children that matched up with my father's sisters.
Okay. Well.
So there was pretty certain, but then when he took off, they found him again in Los Angeles, but we don't know what happened to him after that.
I will send you an email address of my genealogy go-to guide.
Right?
My friend Paul King, who lives in Jerusalem. Paul is a political scientist, UCLA, but a Canadian, who also worked for Lazar. So yeah,
Really?
that's where we met. We both suffered. He suffered longer than I did, but he is big on genealogy. He's traced his family back to I think the 1500s in Bohemia. So
his family?
His family, and so he is the go-to guide about things genealogical. And I will tell him to expect to hear from you.
That'd be great.
And he has questions, and Paul will may be able to help you deal with this information. It doesn't do you any good to go look at Ellis Island records because they didn't come through Ellis Island because it wasn't working then.
You mean the Hines?
Yeah, when they came, it was before Ellis Island was.
There was another port in New York where they just landed, right? That's the deal. Because they came through in 1903.
Yeah.
Ellis Island didn't happen for 20 years later or
No,
something.
1911, I think.
Okay, yeah.
All right, because she thinks Paul is nuts because he's my friend. We've been friends for a long time. So that's the side of the Hein side, the Schlachter side that were killed in Treblinka. The other side, the Lazarovich side,
Right.
would have been, like I said, my grandmother would have been your grandmother's sister-in-law.
Right.
So all of her children and her husband and their children were also relatives. They were cousins.
Right.
And they all were murdered in Treblinka. My father except for Nachman David, was the only one to survive from his immediate family, except for his nephew Mordechai.
Wait a second. Nachman David is your father's father?
No, Nachman David is my father's grandfather, and Nachman David, who they called David, or David, was his brother. My father was the youngest, and the one before him was Nachman David, but they called him David because
that was his brother.
That was his brother.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And his father or his grandfather was Nachman David.
Nachman David. He's the one who died, whose wife ended up being buried in Chicago.
Okay.
My great grandmother.
I'm gonna have to write this down on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I'll write it down. Nicole wants me to write it down on a piece of paper.
Put it on the computer.
Oh no, you can put it on one of these genealogy programs, but
I would go with just a piece of paper with a flow chart.
I'll do it all. But I'm telling you again, it's Sarah. You know, Sarah has this vision that they all were religious in Europe, and that's just nonsense. I have pictures. Thank you very much. I'll make copies and send. I don't know. I'll make copies and send them to you. I have pictures, and you look at the way they're dressed, right? And they were dressed
like regular town people.
Like regular people. Even that picture I've got of I think at the cemetery.
Yeah.
The Runchi and the youngest ones were all dressed in like little naval pinafores. I think that's what
when they were kids.
When they were kids, they weren't dressed like little Haredi kids. They weren't. These were people who worked. These were people who were, in quote, modern for town people. Oh yeah, they worked on Shabbat. When they came to America, they worked on Shabbat.
Right. Now, if I just to sort of retrace a little bit of this, so Mary's family in New York, her siblings were cigar rollers, the women,
That's the story I heard.
right?
All right.
Because the father, I'm pretty sure, was a rabbi. And apparently the story I've gotten that's been told to me several times is that Yossi's father was Lewis. He became the president of the synagogue in Washington. But Mary's father was a rabbi, and his father was also supposed to be a rabbi.
That
Yeah.
I've never heard that story.
The other piece of the story that I don't know we haven't been able to trace very well, is apparently either Mary's, I think it's Mary's father, went to Asia. Do you know about this story?
That's a new one on me.
Apparently he brought Judaica materials to Jews in Asia. Now, Asia theoretically starts at Turkey, so we don't know how far it is.
It could have been. It could have been if he could have brought it to the another side of Russia, which would have been considered Asia.
Asia too.
You know,
But we don't know much about that story. It's just a
who
little
knows?
piece.
I would be surprised.
Well,
He wasn't a Chabadnik, and the Chabadnikim weren't going out to that direction at that time anyway.
so you don't think that Mary's father would have been doing it,
I don't think so. You know, you got to think in terms of logistics.
right?
You know, the Trans-Siberian Railroad hadn't been built yet. What was you going to do? Go by horseback? It's a possibility. It's a possibility. You just don't know. There's too many holes.
That's I think a really fascinating story. I'd love to figure out. But
Listen, the story itself is, by itself, what we know, without embellishments, without adding other things. People have stories. What we know as fact
right,
is interesting enough as it is.
right,
So that if my grandmother, Sarah, had become an American citizen, so she was one of the American citizens that was murdered in Treblinka. Wasn't the only one, but was one.
the sheriff's doctor was in New York in 1930, is what you're saying.
They
It
went
was in
back to
Washington.
Europe.
It was in Washington, and then went back to Europe, and then got killed in Treblinka.
That's right, because she was a few years, because she got Leitchi married off.
Right.
First of all, she brought Leitchi down from Canada, got her married off, and stopped my mother from going to Brazil to marry my father. And said, "You bring him to Canada."
So when he came to Canada, then she let him marry him?
My mother gave my father 2 weeks. He arrived the 1st of April, and they were married the 14th of April. She wouldn't let. She didn't give any time. That's what he always said. He said if he had time, and saw these nice French Canadian girls, who knows what would have happened.
The story that you also appreciate is his father, when I was a little boy, had this practice where he'd go over to all the little boys
And
and shake hands, and he did it to pop up as a young boy, and he did it because I met your father, and Ezra would shake your hand so hard that you would think that the bones were all cracking in your
He
hands.
did it to me. Yeah, he did it to me many times.
Yeah,
Many times.
It was his little joke.
You've done this to the Marlowe kids. And,
No, I shake their hands funny way.
She got kisses.
You got kisses.
I got kisses.
He used to go. My father told me it happened to him, and it happened to me.
everybody.
Right. He used to. It was like a vice grip.
Now we're getting stories from our kids. Well, he used to put them on his lap and let them drive the car.
Yeah, we never knew that.
We never knew that. Plus, we let them smoke a cigar.
He smoked King Edwards. He did not smoke good cigars.
Right.
We never knew that either. Both kids did the same thing.
But I remember meeting your father at Mary and Lou's house. As a young child, maybe I was 6, 7, 8 years old in Washington, and because of that squeeze, I never could forget it.
No, nobody forgets it.
Nobody forgets it.
Rita's cousin, Jerry,
Yeah.
Randy, told me that story. He said, I remember shaking hands with your father, and I was on the ground before I knew what happened.
So it was his way of showing that he was really strong and viral.
Yeah, that's what he did.
Yes. But you see, the funny thing, you talk about family history. I can't ask now, but I would love to know about his life in Brazil.
Right.
And I have pictures from Brazil, and I have his Brazilian citizenship papers and his Brazilian passport. Right? And
So this is the excuse to go to Sao Paulo now for the family.
yeah, not for it would be cousins.
It would be
My
cousins. It's
my kids are absolutely firmly convinced that we probably have relatives, that he was not celibate. As a 19-year-old, good-looking 19-year-old guy.
His father was so good looking when he was younger.
What did your father do when he came to the United States into business?
He was in a grocery store with Sarah's father.
Oh, okay.
They were partners in business for like 35 years and couldn't stand one another for 35 years. No, they really did not. They didn't get on well.
There was a lot of grocery stores of
Well,
our family.
DGS.
What's DGS?
DGS, District Grocery, DGS or District Grocery Society. They were the independent, what they call here McCulloch's, the small grocery stores, and there was a whole bunch of them. And if you look it up, you can Google it on the internet. Avi Hein did it. Google it on the internet, and it's these were all the Jews. These were basically Jewish-owned grocery stores all over the city, and they banded together to purchase.
Yeah, what's the password?
So it ends up though that Lewis owned the grocery store when he was a young man with a bunch of kids, and that was the way he could feed his kids.
Yeah.
And then he went to work for Morris Capert's with the ambassador.
And did very well for himself.
He never did that well. He had a job all this year.
But he did better than a lot of other people in the family,
right.
Who were still schlepping with grocery stores and liquor stores.
Well, do you also know the story? I forget who it would have. It would have been with Morris Capert's also. Morris Capert's, the story I hear, got involved with the film industry, was showing movies in Washington.
Could be.
And it ended up that Lou used to go with him because Lou was a taller man. He was like 6'1".
Oh yeah, he was really. I remember that.
He was tall and he was strong.
No, Capert's is only through Uncle Louis. You call him Lou, like
right.
Uncle Louis.
But what the story was that Morris would go to an empty lot and he would show films. They were like they were not even. I think they were even silent pictures at that time. And he would hang a sheet. And they would charge people to come in to watch the film, and Lou's job was to watch the money box, and he also had a gun, and he was to protect Morris's money, as I think the story goes. But Lou was like the tamest, mildest guy in the world. Probably the only reason why he had a gun was he was in the Spanish-American War. Okay.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he went down with Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. Okay.
Oh dear.
Okay, and he did this as a man who already had a bunch of kids. It was kind of like
Who was this?
Lou, Pop-Up's father,
Was one of the Rough Riders?
was one of the Rough Riders, and he went down to Mexico and was chasing Pancho Villa or whatever around.
No.
True or a made-up story?
Pancho Villa was chased by Black
Pershing.
Pershing.
That was it. It was with Blackjack Pershing.
And Pancho Villa would catch me if you can.
That's right. He wasn't with Teddy Roosevelt. He was with Pershing, Blackjack Pershing. Yeah.
An American invasion of a Latin American country never happened before and hasn't happened since.
Pop-Up's father
What?
went to war
You don't know that.
as somebody who already had kids.
Yeah.
And he was a synagogue leader.
Eventually became the reason why he was a synagogue. No, he was after that.
That's what I'm saying. The Blackjack Persian.
Pershing was before he became the synagogue leader. The reason why he was the synagogue leader is out of that whole family of Hines, he was the only one that was really American. And he could deal with the Washington community as an American.
Not as an immigrant.
So not as an immigrant. So when he would be the president, they had an American sort of leader of the community. And he ended up being the president of the synagogue when my father was born,
Oh my goodness.
bar mitzvahed, and married.
Wow.
All 3 times.
Which synagogue?
6th and I.
Oh God, Sixth and I. Isn't that out of Israel?
I don't know the name.
I think
We went
that.
there. There's a picture
We
of
went-
him back in the day with a whole bunch of the congregants.
No,
Right,
but
we went
that's a historical
They have a room.
That's a historical monument. It's still a 6 to 9.
Yeah. Well, what happens is there's 2 synagogues right near that location, but he was a 6 to 9, and they moved out eventually out by Walter Reed Military Hospital. The synagogue moved uptown. I think it's on Connecticut Avenue.
Yeah, that would be Addis Israel. That was it.
And it ends up, if you go into that synagogue, they have a museum there, one of the rooms, and there are all these photographs. And my grandfather's in there.
That's where Melvin and Sue Ellen are members there.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So it's interesting, but no, I remember Uncle Louis very well. I mean,
he was a really quiet guy.
He was
really
quiet.
Kind of funny.
Yeah, he was quiet, which meant he had no place in the Hein family.
The other story, Jordan, that's interesting about Pop-Pop's father, Lou, and Mary, was we used to go down to Washington a lot when I was a kid, and for Hanukkah, Lou and Mary used to give every grandchild a silver dollar, but these were the silver dollars, the Liberty silver dollars. They were really big.
And they were real silver.
And they were real silver. And
we have a whole bunch of those.
That's what they are.
But where are they?
They're in my office, on the shelf. Okay? And those are all from Lou and Mary that I got. They're all coins that have like dates like 1918 on them. Now, I didn't get them in 1918, but he got them.
Yeah.
And when all the kids came over at Hanukkah, that was our Hanukkah gelt.
But you see, what you missed, because you were in Philadelphia, you missed the famous Hein family circle meetings.
I went to a couple of them.
So you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yes.
It ended up that the Hein family circle, that we have a photograph of the Hein family circle meetings, a couple of them.
Yeah.
And by the time I went to them, it was in the bottom of Riggs Bank. That's where they used to have the meetings then. And I remember, everybody would get together and they had
they would scream and yell at one another and fight every meeting. And then afterwards, a whole bunch of them would get in the cars and drive up to Baltimore to go to East Baltimore Street to the strip clubs.
The guys?
The guys, the wives, everybody.
Really?
Yeah. That's what I remember. Right. You know what? I think I have a picture, which I just had copies made for my kids. It looks like it's from my brother's bar mitzvah, and it's like all the aunts and uncles, my father's aunts and my father's uncles, and I think there's a picture of I have to see if I think they're all there, including Mary and your grand.
Because I think I sent you a picture once. Hashi's in it, and Carolyn's mother, Frida.
Yeah, I'm going to look through my pictures and send you what I have, the interesting ones. I really have
Not
to.
the strip club pictures?
No, I never went. But
Who never went?
I never went with them. I was
No,
too
you
young.
go with them. So,
I went with you once before we left for Canada.
that's true.
No, but there's I'll send you Paul King's email address. And he's my go-to. He's given papers on genealogy, Jewish genealogy, and he's into it. And I keep saying to him, as his wife says to him, "What are you going to do with all this stuff after you're done?" Goes like this. He said, he doesn't know. He'll probably try to get a book published. But Paul, bless his heart, takes forever to do anything. He wants to make sure every.
My father goes to the Mormon, the Latter-day Saints Center near our house.
Yeah.
And he looks up stuff all the time. And
yeah.
That's how he tracked the Israel John Rosenberg
but
story.
You can. There are other ways of tracking as well.
Right.
But
I went to a Jewish genealogical. I don't want to call it a convention, but it sort of was at our synagogue.
Yeah.
But they brought all these people in that were genealogical people that did stuff on Poland and Russia, and some of the people had books, and then there were some more modern people. And
well, the thing I sent you from Dombrovia about it mentions a guide to the town 1927 or 26, and I've been sort of trying to track down, even though it's in Polish. And what's interesting about Dombrovia is if you look at the census, because it was really very close to the Russian border.
This, by the way, just so we get on tape, This is Dumbrova Bialystok.
That's the only one we're interested in.
Yeah, but there's another Dumbrova.
There are
that's-
several because it was
Right.
a common name, but this
Right.
is the one
So
we're
if
interested
we pull up the map or whatever, it's not
You
gonna
can
be
actually see Dumbrova Bialystok on Google Maps, and you can actually see it today.
in. Yeah.
Still,
What's left there from the time of the Jews, there is according to Leitchi and Runchi, there is a sort of a storage bunker that was built at the beginning of World War I that my grandfather, the one who died, who was Mary's brother, had built.
and his name again is.
That would be Yehoshua, my grandfather, Yehoshua ben Yamin. Joshua,
Josh.
not Yosef, no, Joshua, Yehoshua ben Yamin. That's why you have a lot of Yehoshuas and a lot of Yosefs, but they were, they were religious, but they weren't religious. I mean, they weren't crazy religious.
Right.
They were working. They understood that there was a world out there. There was,
Nah. Sorry, Lily.
so this is not this image that they all were sitting and learning Gemara like Sarah has. I'm sorry if she hears this. Who cares? They were. I'll send you pictures. They're mostly of my family.
Right.
But you'll see, all you have to do is see the way they're dressed. I think I even have a picture, I have to find it, of my mother, and I don't remember who else, but they were dressed like flappers
Really?
from the 20s, all right? My mother
They couldn't have been that religious.
they weren't that religious.
They weren't.
They were, they would go to the holidays and Shabbat the synagogue, maybe, I don't know. But
Now
there's
this would be your mother and her siblings,
my
right?
mother and her siblings, when
And
they were
I'm
young.
just wondering whether or not that would have been different with Mary and hers, who were
A generation older.
older, right?
And listen, if they were religious, they certainly stopped being religious the minute they landed in America. I still remember a story from the late Jack Mandel told me. I don't know if you know who the Mandels are from Cleveland.
No.
3 brothers, Jack, Joe, and Mort. Mort's the baby.
And how are they related?
They're not related,
Okay.
but they are among the wealthiest Jews in America. They're not multimillionaires, they're billionaires. All right, they really are. When they sold their company to a company in England, each brother got $900 million. Plus, together, they got 25% of the shares in the new company.
What company was
It
it?
was, oh God, it's gone out of my head. It'll come to me, I don't remember. And Jack told me a story that his father had come to America before the war.
Before World War II or
World
before
War
War I, right?
He and his mother and his brother Joe, Mort was born in the United States, were left in Europe, and they were brought to America after the war. And the first thing his father did was take him to a barber and have his payas cut off. And he said he cried. He was 10 years old, and he cried. He was 99 when he died, and he was full of stories about. He said he would never go back. He and his late wife, well, now he's dead too. They traveled all over the world. They had the money to do it, but never went. He said had no desire to go to Poland. I said, me too. Thank you, Jack. I knew there was a reason I liked you, that sort of thing. And he said they cut his pants off, and he was in shock.
They cut off his pants when he came to the United States.
When he came to the United States, his father did it.
So I'm looking at, is this the Bialystok that we're talking about is sort of like right near the
Russia.
border of Poland and Belarus and Lithuania?
Yes.
Right.
And Dumbrova is like a town nearby?
About
or near?
70 kilometers away.
Dumbrova is a bigger town, but Dumbrova Bialystok
But I
is a
don't
town.
see Dumbrova on the map. Which direction would I have to go in to find that?
It would. I think it's
That's
a little bit
north of Bialystok?
Oh,
Or south.
well,
You-
there's two. There's a. You
Oh,
have to type in.
Gmina Dumbrova Bialystok. I see it.
Yeah.
It's right near the border
Right.
to
Well,
Now,
I
my
said,
mother.
show him, let him look at the thing I sent you.
Right. I have it on the book. I have a black book that Sarah gave me.
Please, that's the thing that was done by Nevins or whatever his name was. That's nice, but the one I sent you gives you all the Jewish communities in the Bialystok region,
Right.
and there's a page on Brother.
Right. Now it ends up that Jordan, it ends up that Mary Hein, when the story that I always heard as a child was also that she was from Lithuania. Now,
Oh,
Lithuania,
Well, it's only about, I mean, by the
but
looks
it
of
may
it,
be
it's
like
only
no,
40,
because
50
they
miles.
they all wanted to be from Lithuania. They weren't from Lithuania
Why do they want to be from Lithuania?
because being a Litvak was more impressive than being a Galicianer, and Galicianer would be a little south. They were when they were born.
Right,
There was no Poland. It was Russia.
right,
It wasn't Belarus. It was Russia.
right.
That's why my great grandmother, on her when she came to America, it says where was she born? Warsaw, Russia.
That's Sarah Schlocker?
No, 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 no. That's on the Lazar side.
Okay.
All right. Poland went out of existence in 1795 or 96 and didn't come back into existence until after the war,
After World War One.
World War One. So they were
That
Russian.
whole area was Pale of Russia, right?
No, where they were wasn't the Pale. The Pale was further south.
It was further south of where Mary would have lived.
We're further south from where she was born, further south than Dubrovnik.
So the Pale of Russia would be further south of Dubrovnik, Bialystok.
Yeah, the Pale of Russia.
So would that be part of Russia?
It was part of
why,
Russia.
Why is there, what country is this here between Poland and Lithuania right there? Why is that not labeled?
How about you show it to Morty?
Oh my God, make me take off my glasses.
So where the A is Bialystok, but Dumbrova is really a little bit north of where the A is. And there's a country there between,
No, there's Belarus,
to the east, Lithuania to the north.
Lithuania to the north,
And what's kind of northwest there?
northwest,
Yeah, there's another
Go back to
country that's
the
not
hotel.
labeled.
Latvia. All right, and there's Gdansk. You can see that's what Gdansk is where is now.
They're going to go.
Okay. Oh, really? I'm sorry. We're trying to catch up on this. And Minsk is in Belarus. Okay. Nice seeing you.
Yeah, just
We'll see you again. Okay. So that's it.
So you're saying that
There was never, if it was Lithuania, it was a time when Lithuania had a big empire, which included that part of Russia. But when they were born, it was Russia.
right?
All right. All right, because my great grandmother was born before they were, and
The same spot,
she was born in Warsaw, Russia.
right?
Right.
Right.
Okay. So there's I'm going to go through my pictures, and I've got
I would
stuff.
love to see.
I will stuff that I will send you, and it's the genealogical hunt. But what's important is you get. Oh, I was about to tell you. If you look at the thing on Dubrovnik where it gives and the thing I sent you, it tells you what the population was like.
Right.
It said there were Muslims there.
Uh-huh.
So I asked Mordecai about that. Wouldn't ask Sarah, she wouldn't know. I said, Mordecai, what is this? Muslims? He says, oh yeah, there were some that lived near where the cemetery is. The Jewish cemetery. And he said he thought that they were, descendants of Tartars. But I'm pretty sure they were descendants of Mongols who were called Tartars by the Europeans because the Mongols were there a couple of hundred years before.
See, that's what I'm thinking, that maybe that connection to Asia had to do with.
The Mongol Empire?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a possibility. We have images of these people were isolated and lived. Many of them did. They never got more than 5 or 6 kilometers from the town that they lived in. But they were still wandering around.
Right.
There were some that wandered around.
Right.
That's a good story to keep.
The one about going to Asia.
Going to Asia, but where in Asia would be because there were Jews that went.
When Mary died, I was 12 years old.
So that was. I said that when I saw you at the hotel, it was the Renaissance, wherever you stayed up on Mount Scopus, the first time in years.
Oh, we stayed at La Rome.
No, you didn't. No, when you came with your buddy.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I said the last time I saw you was when your grandmother had died.
Right.
That was the last time.
And well, when my grandmother died, there was a woman, and I wish I was my age then. She was 95 years old, and she remembered the day my grandmother was born.
Oh boy, that's interesting.
And I remember talking to her, and I remember my father sitting there, and I remember hearing the story of this woman knew the day my grandmother was born, remembered the excitement. And, you know, I would have loved to have had her
on this
on the
on
tape,
yeah,
right.
yeah. No, you know, it's like I said, it's too bad we didn't know. We weren't smarter when we were younger, and we could ask these questions.
Right,
My father rarely talked about Brazil,
right.
and he never talked about his family. I
Right.
only knew from my
It's probably
mother.
painful, too.
Well, yeah, because he was the only one to survive, except for Mordecai, who came, and his cousin Leipke, who was here as well.
In Israel.
In Israel, yeah. Yeah. And so there are some Lazaroviches in Israel, a few that are related to me, but,
Joy's gonna want to stop it.
okay.
We get all stuff here. Of course, she likes it super expensive. You know,
Of course.
Valentina.
But you put the pieces together,
Right.
and you have to be able to filter them. You know, as a political scientist, you do survey research.
Right.
You know what to filter out.
I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to take Joy
Okay.
back. It was
All right.
wonderful to see you.
Wonderful, and we'll see you again.
No, definitely.
Yeah,
We're
you
not
have
going
to,
anywhere.
You have to filter out.
We'll see
You have to
later.
filter
you guys
out.
hang out with Dad?
You have to filter out. Well, I can give you a ride back. We have to filter out what's mythology, and every family has mythology, and you have to filter. You know, you have to say, all right, let's see what the evidence has to say. All right. And I am absolutely sure that my grandmother, your grandmother's sister-in-law, right, never wore a sheitel.
Right.
Never wore a wig, never covered her hair. I'm absolutely, the pictures I see, that's real hair. My grandfather, the one who died early, who would be your grandmother's brother, the picture I have of him, right, very natty. You know, I'll make a picture of that so you can say this is your great uncle.
Right.
All right. I'll take that out of the frame. All right. And you'll see. It doesn't look like, you know, he had a beard, but you know, everybody had beards.
Right.
You know, he had beard. My other grandfather looks more like, you know, a Polish peasant, a Russian peasant. You know, he was a Starker as well as. But I have pictures of my
What's a Starker?
Strong.
Okay.
I have pictures of a couple of my, I think a couple of my uncles, my father's brothers, who were in the Russian cavalry in the First World War, with the, you know, the red stripes and everything.
Right.
So you know they were connected to the outside world.
Right.
They were not isolated.
They weren't. I would think that at that time they wouldn't have been accepted graciously into the general community, but they were trying to.
They weren't, and they weren't. All right, this was beyond. You know, there was anti-Semitic problems in Poland after Poland came back into existence, and when Russia was around, there was anti-Semitic problems. All right. So I mean, you know, I like the Jews that settled in Estonia.
Right.
Latvia and Lithuania had big Jewish populations. Estonia never did. Well, Estonia, who settled there, they were the Russians, the Jews who had served like 25 years in the Russian army were allowed to settle in Estonia when the Russians controlled Estonia.
Right.
You know. So it's a very small Jewish population, 4,000 or 5,000 today. And so they didn't, they suffered when the Nazis came in, but they didn't lose, you know, the hundreds of thousands of Lithuania and Latvia lost, you know. So all kinds of very strange stories.
Well, the Germans probably would have taken out the
They would-
Estonian Jews too, right?
They would have taken all of them they could get their hands on.
And then put them in camps so some of them survived and came back.
No, so they exterminated them.
So then where did the Estonian Jews, do they come from?
Most of them were ones that hid out or settled after the Second World War.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they came back.
They came back. Yeah, it's a good place to come back to. We liked it very much. All right. But listen, you know, you laugh about these Baltic countries, but you know Skype. You know why Skype? You know the story of Skype?
It was done by Eastern Europeans, wasn't it?
No, the idea for Skype was developed by I think a Swedish University graduate
Right.
and a Danish high school dropout who was sort of a hippie.
Right.
The software that allows it to work
Right.
was developed in Estonia because the Soviets had created a major cybernetic research and development center
Right.
there, which stayed on. And when Microsoft bought Skype from these guys for $1 billion+, they kept the major R&D Skype developed in Estonia. All right. So in Tallinn, right?
It's actually interesting because it's a company that you can only interact with electronically. There's no call up for customer service. It's all internet.
It's all internet, yeah.
There's no voice communication with them.
No, but if you can go to Estonia and go knock, knock, knock on the door.
Right.
But they like to say Lithuania because because that's a higher thing than saying Poland or Russia. Now,
So the Litvaks were Lithuania, and the ones that were further south were. They
were Russian Jews.
Right. But what was the name of the Jewish name for the Jews that lived further south?
That was the Pale. That was Galiciana.
Galiciana, right.
Which is like there's in Spain there's an area that's a Spanish province. It's the same name, almost the same name.
So our family is Galiciana.
Oh no, our family was Russian.
So
they weren't
Litvak.
They were Russian. They weren't part of the. Sarah likes to say they were. They weren't. If you look up the Pale settlement, you'll see its outlined, and it wasn't that far north. All right.
So
and that was Catherine the Great.
Are you Litvak or Galiciana? We would be neither.
You would say no, Russian. The family is Russian.
Right.
Right. It was Russian. That's what it was when
but
they
how
were
long do they think they were in?
In there?
Yeah.
No idea. Dombrovi was. I think they say the first Jews settled there in
1600s, wasn't it?
1700, something like that. I have where they came from. I don't know.
Yeah, because that's what I always wonder.
I know on my father's side where they came from originally, going back 700-800 years. They were kicked out. They were originally from France.
Right. Because I remember
how they get to France. Like theoretically.
Who knows how they got to France? But they were expelled
from France. Got expelled from Spain.
But the Spanish, no. The Spanish Jews who were kicked out settled. Either went to Holland, or most of them ended up in the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan said, "Are these guys nuts? Come."
Right.
And so they settled in Greece and in Turkey, and in Greece they overwhelmed the Greek Jews who had been there for over 2,000 years at the time.
Right.
Not at the time. They'd been there for about 2,000 years. So so there's we talk about an Ashkenazi tradition and a Sephardi tradition. Well, there's a Greek tradition as well that's different. They were overwhelmed because the Sultan said to the Sephardi Jews, allowed them, said, you can bring in printing presses to print your religious books and everything. Wouldn't let the Greek Jews do it. So all of a sudden, the only books they had, the only Sidurim they had, the prayer books they had were Sephardi. So there are still a few Greek synagogues left, Greek style, where the Eitz Chaim, which you saw in Crete, is actually not a Sephardi synagogue. It's a Minhag Yevani, a Greek synagogue. You can see that from the way it's structured, and that's been around for a very long time.
Well, Thessaloniki also had a lot of Jews.
Thessalonica was the heart of Jewish Greece.
Right.
The reason that Greece took such a major hit, they lost a higher percentage of the Jewish population than any other country in Europe, including Poland, was because most of them were concentrated there. The Greek underground, I know this, both the communists and the non-communists knew what was going on and told the Jews, run and hide. So for a number of the smaller communities, they went into the hills and the partisans protected them. Thessalonica, they didn't, because the chief rabbi there was been educated in Germany and couldn't believe the Germans would do anything like this, and said, no, stay. And that's why they were rounded up and all murdered, most of them in Auschwitz.
So we also heard the other day, though, that it's interesting that the Dutch Jews, percentage-wise, were the most captured by the Nazis.
It wasn't a very big community.
It was a small community, but percentage-wise, it was supposed to be the larger number. But you're saying that Greeks were really high up in terms of...
Yeah, they lost 97%, I
And that would
think.
have been mainly the ones in Thessalonica.
Thessalonica
Yeah,
was the Jerusalem of the north.
right. I'm reading a book right now called On the Eve. It's about Jews in Europe before World War II. And it talks about a lot of things we've talked about today, but really breaks down the Jewish community into 4 groups, like the French, Dutch Jews, the German Jews, the Polish Jews, and then the Russian Jews. So it's just going across from
Yeah.
west to east, and about how each one of them was so different,
Yeah.
and how some of them from the more eastern part moved west, and how they got into France and Germany, and how there was
There's a lot of
distinctions-
movement, you know.
distinctions between the local Jews and the Jews that came in with Yiddish. and all
I
that.
know somebody in Cleveland, Peter Rozepka, who is I guess Peter's still alive, who's a major home builder, or was. He tells a story that his family, Rozepka, his family is from Poland. He said, my father knew something was going to happen on September 1st. They were living in western Poland, so he packed up the family and moved them to eastern Poland. So when the invasion occurred, the Russians came in and they were in the eastern part of Poland. He said, my father then knew something else was going to happen and packed up the family in 1941 and moved them further east. So that's how his family survived. He said, my father was very smart. They ended up, I think he said, in Siberia, someplace far away, and survived. And then after the war, they got to Australia, and part of the family came to the States. And bang, he ended up in the States, and he's married to an Egyptian Jewish woman. So, there's all kinds of stories about. So his father was extremely smart. He knew, and he said, "That's it. We're getting out." And he got out just one step ahead of the Nazis.
Well, that story with, I guess, with Runchi leaving the day before.
The day she was. That's so lucky.
Did you hear that part of the story, Dan? Which part? Runchi, which is an aunt of his left.
Your great grandmother's niece.
The day before the Nazis invaded.
Yeah. And that's Pop-Op's
Cousin.
Sailed from Gdansk.
Yeah.
She got out just in time.
Literally, the day before.
And actually,
But it
she
was Danzig then. It wasn't Gdansk.
She actually wasn't going to leave, and her
No.
mother forced her
Yeah,
to go.
and she wanted to stay until after the holidays, Rosh Hashanah.
And she said, "No, you're going to leave.
You're going to leave now and go.
And
Get
they
out."
knew kind of that.
I don't know if they knew. If they knew, they would have,
Maybe the
And
other
they
ones
were,
were
and
gone.
they were originally in a part of Poland that had been taken by the Russians. So they, instead of trying to get out and move further east, they stayed. All right. So that's
So they went from Bialystoki to
from Dumbrova.
Dombrova to
Who?
Gdansk, Runchi.
No, that was the port, but it wasn't Gdansk. It was Danzig at the time.
Danzig. So they went to Danzig from...
The Danzig Free State, which was to give Poland access to the sea.
Right.
All right, but when after the war, it went back to the name of Gdansk,
Right.
which is where what's his face
Why?
Lech Walesa started up.
What I'm a little confused about is you don't put the two names together, Dombrova Bialystoki.
No,
And when I look at the materials, though, it usually puts the two together.
I know that there's more than one other Dombrova. That was
But I think there's more than one other Bialystoki, too.
No, there's only one Bialystok. Only one. It's a big city. It was a big city. It was a major city. It is.
And that's where the cemetery is in Bialystoki.
No, the cemetery is in Dombrova.
See, there's two. So I'm saying to you is there are two Dombrovas.
There's more than two.
Right.
That's
So the way that I've always been able to find it was by referring to it as Dombrova Bialystok.
because it is in the Bialystok governorate, like the state. I don't know what they call it in Poland now.
So
but
it'd be like the county, and then the little village would be.
or it would
Dombrova.
be the state, and there's a village there.
Right.
because if you look, I think I sent you all the villages that were in that area, and that's all part of the Białystok region. Białystok was that whole region was very strange. It was very unlike the rest of Poland because it was close to Russia, and so there were more Russian Orthodox and there were Catholics in the
So
area.
when you talk about the small town that they came from,
Yeah,
what would be the name of that small town?
Dąbrowy. That's what's the name.
Okay.
The other one, there's one that's a steel town. It was a steel town that's in the southwest of Poland, and there's another one somewhere else, but it's not, because I've forgotten what Dąbrowy actually means in Polish or Russian, but it's something else.
Because at one point I also went to the New York Public Library,
Yeah.
and I looked at the maps, and the map of the town, they actually had the census maps, and it showed all of the houses in the town. And their particular town, there weren't that many people in 1903.
No.
It was very sparse.
It was sparse. There were always a couple of thousand people.
Right.
I don't think it ever had more than 6,000. Even today, 6,000 or 7,000 people
Right.
living there, because it was just that's what it was.
Right.
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 There were lots of small towns.
Right.
It's like if you go through Pennsylvania, right? If you go to Dubois, Pennsylvania, or Du Bois as they pronounce it,
Right.
What is it? 4 people there, but there's a campus of the University of Pennsylvania there.
Right.
Or Penn State or whatever, and so that's they're small towns,
I got you.
And then how many
How many
Athens?
times have you heard these stories?
How many
Lots.
Athens are there in the United States?
Probably a lot.
There's Athens, Ohio. There's Athens, Georgia. There is an Athens in Alabama, which has a university, not to be confused with the one in Georgia.
Right.
So they pick up these these names. So it's a common occurrence, and names change.
Right.
Kitchener, Ontario, used to be Berlin, Ontario, and they changed the name in World War I to Kitchener because God forbid you should have a place called Berlin, and Hebron, the town here. There's on coastal Labrador. There's a place they call it Hebron, but it's Hebron. Right. And there are still, I think there's still people living there. Not many, but there's still some. I mean, it's up on the north coast of Labrador.
Right.
The Moravian missionaries were there in the late 1700s, and so you could go up at the beginning of the 20th century and hear Inuit playing Protestant hymns with brass instruments. So,
All right. Well, that's great. Well, I'd love to see the photograph.
I will go through them.
And I'll send you a couple things.
Okay, I will go through, but I'm going to send you real photographs.
Right. That's what
It's much easier for me to go and have copies made and put them in an envelope and send them off. All right, and you'll see from the way that they're dressed.
Right.
These are all from Europe.
When you send me the photographs,
I'll put on the back what they are, who they are.
If you make 2 copies of it, and one of them you write just a little arrow in the people's names, to the extent that you know that you know
No,
them.
I will. It's much easier for me to say going left to right on the back.
Okay.
All right, that's the easiest way. That's what I did.
I'm the one that does that.
She does that. She's very good at that. I gotta
Our
go-
librarian.
Yeah.
I do
All right.
that.
I hope this
Yeah,
helped you. And if
No,
I
that's
think of
great.
if I think of anything else, I will send it on. I got to go use the bathroom.
Okay.
Are you going to go look for a cigar or 2 to take home with you?
I was thinking about it, yeah.
Go ahead. If you need any advice.
We're just in the humidor back here, I
Go
guess?
back in the humidor. The Romeo and Juliet.